Is America following in the footsteps of the Roman Empire? The Roman Empire was great. It was the greatest empire in the western part of the supercontinent of Eurasia. And people of its day thought that it would last forever. It would not be defeated. Well, it did not last forever. What brought about its end and is the United States of America following in the footsteps of the old Roman Empire? We don't know for sure why the Roman Empire fell. All kinds of people have put forth theories of what went wrong. In general, most people believe that the Roman Empire fell from within before it was conquered from without, and it was never able to overcome the very seeds that had been built in it from the beginning. What did it lack? It lacked a real constitution. People who held office, the office they held depended on their ability, their charisma, their attractiveness, how big of a following they could get, and not on the rank of the office. They never did define the power that an office had, and it got to where by the end of the empire, even the office of emperor was nothing more than a mere figurehead office. The emperors were nothing more than mere figureheads. And in fact, the last emperor, Romulus Augustus, was an 11-year-old boy who had no authority whatsoever. But all down through time, there were offices of consul, offices of plebeian, offices of senate, all of which the authority of these offices would change from generation to generation, and they never did define exactly what an office was. Now, standard scholarship today will tell you that just because this happened to Rome does not mean it will happen to the United States, that there are no historical parallels, that we can do the same things that the people in the Roman Empire times did, and we won't suffer the consequences. Well, let's think it through. Is our population declining? Well, no, not really. Well, now let's think about that. It takes 2.1 babies per mother, per woman, in order to keep the population steady. Are we producing that many babies? No. But our population is increasing owing to the fact that foreigners are coming in. There's a wide diversity of opinion on whether this is bad or good. I want to remind you that in the Roman times, foreigners came in also, and they're credited with having destroyed the Roman Empire. They would come in, would not pay taxes, would not contribute, and as a result, the Roman Empire declined and eventually fell. Well, can we say the same thing today? It's not exactly the same. Yes, we have foreigners. Do they get involved? In a lot of ways, yes. But at the same time, Americans are declining in population owing to the fact that our women are not producing an average of 2.1 babies per couple. That means that if the trend continues, Americans will eventually die off and be replaced with we don't know what. Now, it may sound like I'm against foreigners. Not necessarily. But I am against American people, American men and women, not liking each other. I am against American men and women going their own way. And yes, there's a movement on called MGTOW, men going their own way. And the videos I watch about this topic act like it's a good thing. Isn't it great? Isn't it wonderful that men are leaving the women alone and going their own way? No, it is not good. It means that the America that we have known is going to decline and eventually cease to exist. At some point, our enemies are going to feel confident to come in and greatly reduce us in size. I think that the number one reason the Roman Empire fell was it had a population decline. The population has been estimated to have been at 50 million at its height, and then went down to 30 million. 20 million people disappeared from Rome. No, I don't mean they moved from city to country. I mean they died without being replaced by babies, without being replaced by a new generation. How could the population decline? Well, was it wars? Oh yes, there were wars, particularly wars against Persia, but these wars were not big enough to kill off 20 million people. Were there plagues? Well, a few, yes. Mankind has often experienced plagues, and even with our medicine in the 21st century, we have plagues that kill thousands upon thousands of people. But it was not the plagues. So what did cause the big decline in the Roman Empire's population? Simply this. Their men and women did not like each other. Their men and women went their own ways. They did not marry. They did not have children. The result was men and women died unmarried, and the population declined inevitably. Oh yes, they practiced birth control. Yes, they practiced abortion. They practiced other means of limiting births. Now when Christianity came on the scene and became the dominant religion, the practice of exposing babies was largely halted. The practice of abortion largely halted, but it was too late. Their men and their women still did not like each other, owing to the fact that both their men and women were corrupt. They lacked character. Their women were no longer women anymore. Their men were no longer men. And the result was the population declined, and eventually the Roman Empire was overrun by its enemies from without. As I put together this presentation, the United States is facing a war on several fronts. We're facing a war against China over Taiwan, and facing a war against Russia over Ukraine, and we have an enemy in North Korea and in Iran. Can we take on all those wars at one time? The Chinese greatly outnumber us as far as numbers. Russia is not too far behind us, but do we have the resources? Even if we do, in the year 2022, will we have the resources a generation from now, or 2 generations from now? This is not just a problem with the United States, but all of the Western world. I wanted to say Western Christendom, but it's hardly Christendom anymore. But Western Europe is having the same problem. A big decline in population owing to the same thing. Not due to plague, not due to wars, but due to the simple fact that the men and women do not like each other. This is believed to be the same thing that happened in ancient Rome, and it's happened all over the Western world right now. The real reason why the men and women did not like each other in Roman times was due to a decline in morality. In the early days of the Roman Republic, divorce was rare. In the latter days of the Roman Empire, divorce was commonplace. The rich got divorced more than the poor did, but nevertheless, divorce was a big problem that infected the empire. with the result that a lot of people in the Roman Empire did not bother to marry at all. Marriage became much too risky a business. Men died bachelors, women died unmarried, and the result was, obviously, the population declined. We are definitely seeing that in Europe and in the United States. Divorce is common, and a lot of people are choosing not to get married at all because marriage is such a risky business. There were some problems about the Romans that we don't have today. The Romans ate from lead plates and they drank from lead cups, and lead poisoning has been cited as a possible reason for the decline of the health of the Roman people, which led to a decline of the empire. Well, we today don't drink from lead cups, or we don't eat from lead plates, and in fact we largely avoid contact with lead as much as possible, knowing how much harm it can do us. So 1600 years has made somewhat of a difference. In addition to the decline in morals, which led to a decline in population, and in addition to the influx of foreigners, there was another problem with the Romans, and that was heavy taxes. As I mentioned, a lot of the foreigners that the Romans allowed in would not pay taxes. That meant the Roman citizens had to bear the burden of taxation, and taxes became heavier and heavier, with the poor people bearing the heaviest weight of the taxes. In the United States today, we see the very same thing. In Europe, there's an interesting scenario. Until recently, the wealthy Europeans did not pay taxes. But as pressure was put on them, eventually more and more wealthy Europeans began to pay taxes. Until today, even kings and queens in Europe pay taxes. A lot of your tax money goes to welfare programs, and this will be very unpopular to some people. But I want to remind you, Rome had a welfare program. We call it bread and circuses. Rome fell. The Chinese emperors at times had a welfare program. The Tang dynasty helped its poor. They fell. The Song dynasty that followed the Tang helped the poor. They fell. Am I saying that governments that help the poor fall? History proves in a lot of cases this to be true. Charity might not be a matter for the government. Again, this will not be popular with a lot of people, but it's something that needs to be thrown out there. Today, a high percentage of our tax money goes to help the poor. The poor people in Rome, whom the government fed, would riot frequently. Nobody knew when a riot would start, and the rioting was very damaging. And Rome tolerated this lack of law and order. We in our country today, the United States of America, are doing the same thing. We tolerate rioting with the result that a lot of destruction occurs, and somebody is going to have to pay to clean up the mess that is made. Somebody is going to have to pay to put the country back together again once the rioters have destroyed it. Now, I know every rioter thinks that he's right and society has failed him. Society is wrong. Rioting is uncivilized. Rioting will bring the country down, and eventually this nation will fall, even as the Roman Empire did. Another problem that Rome had was an unfavorable balance of trade. The Silk Road brought products from China to the Roman world, and in turn Roman gold and silver coins found their way to the east, into Persia and India and China, and these gold and silver coins are still found in China to this day. Eventually, what happened was Europe ran out of money which consisted of gold and silver coins. Europe ran out of that, and they would remain largely free of gold and silver coins until we found a lot of gold deposits in Africa, and we found that the Inca Indians in South America had a lot of gold, which the Europeans stole. Let's face it, let's call it what it was. The Europeans took back to Europe, and gold became a standard for money in Europe once again. But before all this, the Roman Empire largely ran out of gold, and Western Europe was to go for generations with very, very little in the way of hard money. The United States today has also an unfavorable balance of trade, which means that we buy more from abroad than we sell, which means that our money goes out to other countries without a lot of it returning. This eventually is going to lead to the United States inevitably running out of money unless something happens to reverse the trend. Now you might say, oh, the United States can print up money. That's true, but for how much longer? And at what point will our currency become utterly worthless? And at what point will the bubble burst? This, I believe, will eventually lead to the United States' downfall. So with what I've observed so far, do I think the United States will fall? I think there is an excellent possibility. Between inflation, lack of morality, influx of people who come into this country illegally, and also a big decline, noticeable decline in the population of Native Americans, I believe that this is going to lead to a decline. And once we've declined to a certain point, our enemies will take note, they will come in, and the results will be awful.